Good morning and welcome to today's committee hearing on civil and human rights. At this time, please place all electronic devices on silent and vibrate mode. If you want to submit testimony, you could come up to the Sergeant-at-Arms desk and fill out this witness slip. Thank you, Chair. You may begin.
Good morning. I feel like no one ever responds back when we say good morning. Thank you for responding back. My name is Natasha Williams, and I am the chair of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. I would like to thank everyone for joining us for today's hybrid hearing on the enforcement of the city's access to reproductive health care facilities law. As many of you already know, last week the Supreme Court ruled to overturn Roe v. Wade. To say that this decision will have monumental impact on all of us is an understatement. While the right to an abortion remains legal here in New York, we must continue to work on protecting accessibility to reproductive health services as well as the safety of those seeking them. The National Abortion Federation, also known as NAF, releases a yearly report on violence and disruption statistics outside and around clinics. Both their 2020 and 2021 reports showed that harassment from anti-abortion protesters is increasing. Incidents involving assault and battery have more than doubled for each of these years. The majority of the assault and battery incidents involved anti-abortion protesters engaging in fights with clinic escorts, patient companions, and patients. NAF's report highlighted behaviors such as pushing, shoving, slapping, kicking, physically fighting, and use of pepper spray against clinic escorts, staff, and others outside of the clinics. This problem is not limited to other states. It is common for these protesters to travel from out of state to places with fewer restrictions on abortion, such as New York City, to delay or disrupt services in an effort to deter those who are seeking care, or in some cases to cause harm to staff and providers. In 2009, the New York City Council passed the Access to Reproductive Health Care Facilities Act. Part of this act specifically tailored the protections for people accessing a reproductive health care facility. It created a 15-foot protected area around the facility and specified a standard of knowingly acting to obstruct access to a facility or interfering in its operation or any attempt to do so as violations of this act. The act is enforceable by the New York City Police Department and also allows a private right of action, meaning violators can be sued by people harassed while seeking or providing care. At today's hearing, the committee looks to learn how the NYPD enforces this law and about incidents or experiences they've had, if any, outside of the city's reproductive health care facilities. Additionally, the committee is looking to learn more about the Commission on Human Rights' role in protecting the rights guaranteed by federal, state, and local laws, including protections based on gender and sexual or reproductive health decisions in the context of access to reproductive health care. Lastly, the committee will be hearing Intro 474, sponsored by Councilmember Hanif, in relation to a public information and outreach campaign regarding safe access to reproductive health care, and Resolution 272A, sponsored by Councilmember Menon, in support of state legislation proposing an amendment to Article 1 of the New York State Constitution in relation to equality of rights and protection against discrimination. I look forward to receiving testimony and feedback from the administration, advocates, and members of the public as we work on keeping everyone seeking care safe and protected. I'd like to thank committee staff, Jay Sari and Liam, as well as my own staff, Everton and Ashley, and I'll now turn it over to Councilmember Hanif for some opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Councilmember Shahana Hanif, and I represent the 39th District in Brooklyn. Thank you to the Committee on Civil and Human Rights and to Chair Natasha Williams for holding this critical hearing and for including my bill Intro 474 on today's agenda. I want to express gratitude to the co-prime sponsors who introduced this bill alongside me, Public Advocate Williams, Chair Williams, Councilmember Hudson, and Councilmember Caban. I also want to thank a majority of council members, including Speaker Adams, for signing on as sponsors. Finally, I want to thank the thousands of everyday New Yorkers who have taken to the streets over the past week to support abortion rights in response to our illegitimate Supreme Court's despicable decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. In this fraught moment, city government must step up and do all we can to promote reproductive autonomy within the 5 boroughs. Thankfully, the city has already enshrined a number of key protections as law. However, these protections are underutilized due to many New Yorkers not being aware that they exist. Intro 474 would address this issue by requiring the City Commission on Human Rights to conduct a language-accessible and culturally competent outreach campaign to inform the public about the following. 1, protections against obstruction or harassment when entering a reproductive health care facility. You cannot be blocked from entering an abortion clinic. This is critical, as quote-unquote pro-life protesters have consistently sought to intimidate those obtaining abortions. 2, protections under the human rights law against discrimination in employment or housing or other settings on the basis of reproductive health decisions. You cannot be fired or evicted due to your decision to obtain an abortion. And 3, the right to file civil action if either of these protections are violated. While abortion rights are under attack on the federal level and in other states and municipalities, residents and those who travel here for abortions need to be fully equipped with the knowledge of the rights they are guaranteed in New York City. This bill, in tandem with the suite of bills being heard this month, will further cement New York City as a bastion for reproductive justice. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from the administration, my colleagues, and the public.
And now I will turn it over to committee staff to swear in the administration.
Panelists, please raise your right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Yes. Great. The floor is yours.
Okay, now it's my turn to say good morning. Okay, no one responded to me either. Good morning, Chair Williams, Councilperson Hanif, Councilperson Menon, I know is also here, and members of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights, as well as committee staff. I'm Joanne Cama-Ford, the Deputy Commissioner of Policy and External Affairs at the New York City Commission on Human Rights. And it's my pleasure to join you today to testify regarding the protections available under the city human rights law related to reproductive health decisions, as well as Intro 474, which mandates the Commission to conduct an outreach campaign about protections in the human rights law, as well as those in the public safety provisions of the Admin Code. I'm joined today by Kadri Chowdhury, Deputy Commissioner of the Community Relations Bureau at Cchr, and we're pleased to testify alongside the NYPD today. We're here at a time when rights related to reproductive and sexual health are under clear threat. As already noted, the highest court in the United States has rolled back rights that were hard-won 50 years ago to protect basic bodily autonomy. The Commission stood on the steps of City Hall last Friday with sibling agencies, the mayor, and members of the council to demonstrate that New York is and will remain a city where sexual and reproductive rights are not only protected, but that they are prioritized. In this context, I'm proud to be here to underscore that the Commission is aligned with City Council's goals to ensure that all New Yorkers, especially those who are pregnant and seeking sexual and reproductive health care, know their rights regardless of where they work or live. We support efforts to ensure that access to reproductive health and abortion is strengthened in New York City, and that this city is welcoming for all of those in need of safe health care. As you know, the Commission is the local civil rights enforcement agency that implements the city's human rights law. one of the broadest anti-discrimination laws in the country, with 27 protected categories and that cover housing, employment, and public accommodations. The Commission's Law Enforcement Bureau enforces the city human rights law by investigating complaints of discrimination from the public, initiating its own investigations on behalf of the city, and utilizing testing to help identify violations of the law. Complementing law enforcement, the Community Relations Bureau provides workshops, trainings, and outreach on New Yorkers' rights and the obligations of businesses, employers, and housing providers under the human rights law, working with community partners and sibling agencies. 7 years ago, the Commission established the Office of the Chair, which houses the agency's policy and legislative functions, as well as communications. The goal of the city human rights law is to ensure that all New Yorkers live in dignity, can have their basic needs met, and can fully exercise their human rights. The law applies to private entities and government agencies. Under the law, covered employers cannot discriminate against job applicants and employees based on their age, immigration status, arrest or conviction record, gender, national origin, pregnancy, race, or other protected category. Employment protections apply to employers with 4 or more employees, those who employ domestic workers, as well as employment agencies and labor organizations. Most employees have rights regardless of whether their position is full-time, part-time, or an internship. Independent contractors are also protected by the city human rights law. Since 2015, the human rights law has been amended by the City Council 38 times. More than a dozen of these amendments relate to employment. In addition to prohibiting discrimination and most recently expanding protections to domestic workers and requiring salary transparency, the human rights law prohibits employers from retaliating against an individual for reporting discrimination. I now want to turn to the protections most connected to this hearing, pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions, as well as sexual and reproductive health decisions. Pregnancy discrimination has long been a focus of the Commission. City Council codified the right to reasonable accommodations on the basis of pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions in 2014. The agency first published guidance on pregnancy discrimination in 2016, guidance which has been updated last year to reflect additional legislation that requires employers to provide lactation accommodations. Employers are required to ensure that pregnancy protections are implemented, as well as to post notices of protections and have lactation policies for when individuals return to the workplace. More recently, in 2019, City Council passed an amendment prohibiting employers from discriminating against employees on the basis of decisions about sexual or reproductive health. As a result of the 2019 amendment, it's a violation of the city human rights law for an employer to treat a person less well because of their actual or perceived sexual or reproductive health decisions. The term sexual and reproductive health decisions is defined as any decision an individual makes to receive services for their sexual and reproductive health, reproductive system, and its functions. This includes, but isn't limited to, fertility-related medical procedures, STD prevention, STD testing and treatment, family planning services and counseling, for example, birth control drugs and supplies, emergency contraception, sterilization, pregnancy testing, and abortion. This also includes hormone therapy or other transition-related care for transgender New Yorkers, or other decisions involving reproductive system. This protection builds on human rights law provisions regarding gender and gender identity, among others. It is a violation of the city human rights law for an employer to enforce policies or practices treating employees less well because of their actual or perceived sexual and reproductive health decisions. That means to use judgments and stereotypes to exclude employees from employment projects or as a pretext for unlawful discriminatory decisions, or to make offensive jokes singling out and engaging in other harassment of individuals on the basis of sexual reproductive health decisions, or to engage in other adverse employment actions on these bases. For example, employers are not allowed to fire an employee after learning an employee is considering or had an abortion, nor can an employer avoid meeting with an employee on their team after learning an employee sought preventative treatment for HIV. Further, an employer cannot repeatedly criticize an employee for pursuing in vitro fertilization, which the employer believes is not natural. While employees are not specifically entitled to reasonable accommodations for their sexual and reproductive health decisions, they are entitled to accommodations on the basis of pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions, which encompass lactation and some sexual and reproductive health decisions. For example, people who have experienced miscarriages, abortions, and fertility treatment must be provided reasonable accommodations unless it proves to be an undue hardship for the employer. This might look like a period of unpaid or paid sick leave or a flexible schedule for a period of time to account for appointments related to the procedure or experience. Experiences of discrimination in employment and discriminatory harassment under the human rights law can be vindicated by reaching out to the Commission. Violations of the city human rights law can result in damages to the complainant and civil penalties to the City of New York. Other affirmative relief is also available, including restorative justice interventions, anti-discrimination trainings, and policy changes. Where there's a finding that discrimination occurred, the Commission will work to craft a remedy that's meaningful to the complainant and, where appropriate, with other members of an impacted community. In the arena of pregnancy and related medical conditions, the largest number of cases fall into the category of failure to accommodate, followed by claims of discriminatory discharge or firing, and then hostile work environment claims. Cases in this area are often resolved through damages, as well as provisions of the accommodations that were requested or similar, changes to schedules and duties, and requirements of managerial trainings and policy changes. In order to educate New Yorkers on their rights, the Commission continuously seeks outreach opportunities. In addition to developing the guidance I mentioned previously, the Commission has a one-page fact sheet on protections against employment discrimination on sexual and reproductive health decisions. And the protections related to sexual and reproductive health and pregnancy are also included in our most frequent training, Human Rights 101. Moreover, in 2019, the Commission, along with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and the Commission on Gender Equity, hosted a public hearing on pregnancy and caregiver discrimination, where the Commission compiled legislative and policy recommendations to improve on reproductive health. Over the past 3 years, the Commission has worked to operationalize many of these recommendations, including improving protections for domestic workers and conducting public education and outreach on pregnancy and caregiver discrimination, in addition to educating employers about their general obligations under the human rights law. Since 2019, the Commission has conducted 582 Human Rights Law 101 trainings that educate on these protections. In addition, the agency joins and organizes panels and other events to highlight the same protections. For example, in 2021, we held a discussion entitled Stories from the Delivery Room: Health Equity, Pregnancy, and the Maternal Health Care of People of Color. Dr. Uche Blackstock, founder and CEO at Advancing Health Equity, which addresses bias and racism in healthcare, headlined the event. The Commission also continues to partner with the Neighborhood Health Action Centers of DOHMH to conduct outreach to pregnant people. In closing, I will turn to Intro 474. Intro 474 falls in line with the continued efforts of the Commission to ensure reproductive and sexual health is available for all New Yorkers. We support initiatives to inform the public about their sexual and reproductive health rights. It's our goal to increase outreach and awareness of fundamental rights, particularly for those most impacted by sexual and reproductive health decisions. We believe that a sexual and reproductive health rights campaign would be most impactful and effective if it's part of a joint agency strategy in collaboration with sibling agencies that can speak more closely to the laws regarding physical access, as well as the services that sexual and reproductive health facilities provide. We also look forward to working with Council to incorporate the campaign we are discussing today with other public education campaigns that have been recently introduced by the Council, including Intro 478, sponsored by Councilmember Hudson, Intro 506, sponsored by Councilmember Rivera, and the Public Advocates Intro 86. The Commission will close by emphasizing our commitment to ensuring all people are able to make the sexual and reproductive health decisions that are essential to dignity, autonomy, and the exercise of human rights, regardless of their identity. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and my colleagues and I look forward to continuing to discuss Intro 474 and exploring citywide collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. And before the police department goes, I'm going to have Councilmember Menon provide statements on her resolution.
Well, thank you so much, Chair, for this very important hearing. I'm delighted to be here today. So the fundamental right to reproductive services and programs is clearly under assault. New York remains a beacon of hope for so many across the country. However, not everyone is able to claim equal rights before the law. Our state constitution does not guarantee that, and it is time for that to change. Resolution 242 calls on New York State to amend the state's constitution with an equal rights amendment. State Senator Liz Krueger and Assemblywoman Rebecca Seawright's legislation would expand Article 1 of the New York State Constitution to protect against discrimination and offer legal equality for all. The last time the state constitution was amended in regards to equal rights was 1938. Since then, there have been multiple and significant movements on equality. Right now, gender identity, disability, ethnicity, national origin, pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, sexual orientation, and gender expression are not listed as protected classes. For existing protected classes, there is a loophole that limits equality. Because of a 1949 court ruling, the current language in the state constitution is not self-executing. In other words, protections of an individual's civil rights have to be supported with specific legislation. New York State enacting this legislation would clarify civil rights and ensure a self-executing provision. It's critical that the New York City Council send a clear message for lawmakers in Albany to pass these bills. There are 11 states right now that have equal rights amendments. New York is not among those states. Yet we know how important it is to offer protection for people too often marginalized and targeted. That is why I'm calling on my colleagues to join me in calling New York State to do its part and update our Constitution for all. I thank the Chair for allowing me to speak, and I look forward to today's hearing. Thank you.
I just wanted to also acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Richardson Jordan. And off to VD.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Williams, and good morning, members of the council. My name is Carrie Talansky. I'm an assistant commissioner for the New York City Police Department's Legal Bureau. With me today is the department's Director of Legislative Affairs, Michael Clark. On behalf of Police Commissioner Keishan Sewell, we are pleased to testify regarding the NYPD's role in ensuring individuals access to reproductive health care facilities. In the shadow of the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson, Whole Women's Health, it is important to reiterate that the right to access an abortion and reproductive health services in New York State remains protected, and the NYPD remains committed to safeguarding that right. In 2009, the City Council passed Local Law 24 to protect New Yorkers' right to access reproductive health care. The law delineates and prohibits activities aimed at preventing a person from accessing reproductive health care facilities. This local law recognizes the convergence of protected rights outside of reproductive health care facilities and seeks to strike the balance of protecting the right to access such facility with an individual's right to express their opinion. The New York City Police Department is tasked with ensuring the safety and rights of all New Yorkers. For that reason, the department seeks to strike the same balance of rights. When responding to First Amendment activities, the department's goal is to ensure that we do not intrude upon the rights of expression or association of attendees, and in this circumstance, that we ensure that people can access facilities in an unobstructed manner. We attempt to establish a rapport with group leaders to foster cooperation and to attempt to have group leaders intervene before activities become unlawful and before enforcement becomes necessary. To be clear, the department will not tolerate any attempt to prevent a person from accessing a reproductive health care facility. To that end, officers have been instructed to do directed patrols at such facilities, and our critical response command teams have been rotating assignments at these locations as well. We will continue to monitor the situation and will readjust resources as necessary. Thank you, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you. So I will just jump right into questions. The Federal Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, FACE Act, State Clinic Access Act, and the City's Access to Reproductive Healthcare Facilities Act provides for protections for those accessing reproductive healthcare facilities. The state and local laws were intended to supplement the federal law by empowering local officials to combat violence at these facilities. So how have these laws been enforced by NYPD?
So currently, the NYPD is, in light of the recent decision, we have many different layers of protections in place at these facilities. Primarily, we have identified every single clinic throughout the city, and we have notified the local precinct commanders that such a facility is within the confines of their responsibility. We have then directed them and their staff to conduct outreach to these facilities so that there is a direct point of contact in the event that there is an incident or an issue arises. We also have regular directed patrol, which means that patrol officers are directed to stop by regularly and check in with the clinic and ensure that everything's okay. We also have both critical response command and counterterrorism officers who are rotating between facilities and are stationed outside for visibility to deter any sort of violence or interference with the facility. In addition to that, currently, our Intelligence Bureau and our Counterterrorism Bureau are scrubbing the internet, looking for any threats towards any of these facilities in New York City, and obviously would investigate fully if such a threat was deemed credible. In terms of ensuring access and free and unobstructed access to these facilities, our officers respond anytime that there is any sort of conflict reported from a facility. And as we spoke about in our testimony, we attempt to strike a balance between ensuring that people have a right to access the facility unobstructed, but we also have to balance that with the right of those outside who are engaged in the freedom of expression.
Absolutely. So has the NYPD taken any, I guess, additional measures, and maybe that's some of what you described, to preserve, protect access to reproductive health care, taking into account that unlawful activity outside of these facilities may increase following the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs?
Yes, and we will continue to assess the situation both here in New York City and throughout the country to ensure that our steps that we have taken are adequate.
Okay, and do you have any data on previous reports of incidents happening at facilities prior to the Supreme Court decision?
So, I mean, I don't know if we have data, but I know there are certain set protests that happen at a few clinics throughout the city. Our normal procedure or goals there is we work with the clinics and the protesters and the counter-protesters to make sure people can still have access, keep people, from, if it gets heated, to keep them apart, and make sure everyone is exercising their constitutional right, First Amendment, without blocking access to the reproductive health care facilities.
Okay, thank you. For CCHR, we know that the city's access to reproductive health care facilities law has been in place since 1994, and many clinic employees and visitors are still facing harassment when they attempt to access the facilities. And some visitors seem unaware of their laws, of our laws to protect their access. And so is CCHR tracking information about complaints related to discriminatory harassment from people accessing reproductive health care facilities?
Thank you for the question. I don't have related to specific facilities, but we do discriminatory harassment. We do track. We tend to track it by protected category, which in this case would be pregnancy or for discriminatory harassment, sexual and reproductive health decisions. Discriminatory harassment claims face a high bar at the commission. I can say over the past 3 years, we've had claims between, 7 to 20 discriminatory harassment filed claims, and a very small number of those are in the arena of gender. And we have none that are specifically sexual and reproductive health decision, though when someone reports, those things can overlap, and so they might say pregnancy or they might say one or the other. But we have not seen a huge amount, and I can look to see if we can put a finer point on the facilities, but there's small numbers on gender in general.
Okay, and then I have a question for something that you mentioned in your testimony, that you would like to execute on this campaign and strategy in collaboration with sibling agencies. Can you share which sibling agencies you think need to also be in collaboration?
Sure, and I think I referenced also a number of other kind of pending bills that
Yes.
touch on pieces of this. So
And so actually, that question, and then just also in general, what are your thoughts on Intro 474 and how do you feel it can be improved?
sure. So on sibling agencies, I think I'm glad NYPD is here because they have the expertise on the access piece. I know there are other agencies that are looking at these issues, obviously health-related agencies that are focused on access to these services and also the role of service providers, as well as other agencies that are looking at what I think are facilities that portend to be focused on these issues, but may or may not be discouraging people from seeking reproductive health.
Would that be Consumer Affairs?
Likely, it would be Department of Consumer and Workplace Protection and possibly others as well. So I think those are some of the agencies that I would want to collaborate with. I know that 474 also has a language access component, and there are many agencies with expertise in that area as well. We are all, as city agencies, required to comply with local law 30, so that all our materials are in the 10 required languages. I know from CCHR's position, when we're doing a particular campaign, for example, like domestic workers, we try and go above and beyond what is required to identify where's the need and what languages should we be communicating with communities that are likely to be impacted in. So that's in general some of the agencies. I don't know if that's a comprehensive list, but we've been, and we have partnered with all of those agencies. I think I will also, I referenced in my testimony a DOH-MH collaboration, and that's ongoing in lots of different areas, as well as the Commission on Gender Equity. On 474 generally, I think one piece of this slate of bill packages is that it has many component parts, right? And thinking about how do we effectively message different pieces of the roles of city agencies, and that's why I think collaboration is so helpful. One of the public advocates bill references certain pieces of our law related to pregnancy. 474 references some other protections, and I think thinking about how to comprehensively get information to New Yorkers and working collectively would likely be effective and more impactful.
So are you suggesting that these bills should be combined, like Intro 506, Intro 470, and Intro 86?
So I'm suggesting that we have further discussion about which pieces should be combined. I think I don't want to say now because I haven't looked at all of them in great depth, but I think there are pieces that can be combined, and that collaboration and kind of thinking about that really with a more fine-tooth comb would be fruitful.
Right. No, I mean, I agree in terms of like wanting to really look at some of these other bills that we're not hearing today to make sure we're being intentional about our decision, because, you know, based off of like your testimony, I do think there is, I don't want to say overlap, but there's space to also include these other components in the same directive. And I think that's what you were alluding to, correct?
And I think thinking about, and we've talked about this in many spaces, like who are the effective messengers for the intended audiences also, because I think communication from one agency versus another can sometimes land differently, and those are important considerations.
Okay, I have more questions, but I'll pause to let my colleagues ask questions, and so I will turn it to Councilmember Hanif.
Thank you so much. I guess to go back to the chair's line of questioning around combining the suite of bills, I mean, I would disagree with that, but I would like to just affirm like why we're pushing CCHR as part of our bill, because I'm aware that the other bills are not suggesting that. Though I do feel that some of the other services that exist in the city should be a part of the education campaign that CCHR then publicizes, because what we're simply asking for is that these are protected categories and we've got these rights. Now they must be disseminated so that every New Yorker knows and is aware that this is a city that is already safe, accessible, etc. So would like to go into some of the details around 474. How much money does CCHR envision being able to dedicate to this campaign out of its current operating budget?
So I don't have a specific number with me today. I think if a campaign to reach all New Yorkers is a massive undertaking, and I would have to get back to looking at past campaigns that we've done with a dollar amount. Yeah.
As a sort of reference point, how much did the arts campaign around the subways for New Yorkers to know that this is a safe place for our Asian communities, what was the cost of that campaign?
So again, I will have to go back to look at that, but I believe it was a million plus campaign, and that also, I mean, there was a practitioner artist in residence who was collaborating, so it was also, that was multi-agency because DCLA was involved, and it was quite a long planning phase and then execution phase as well, with collaboration from the agencies that allowed us to do the takeover of Barclays Center and to really push out in all the spaces available to us.
Yeah, that's helpful to know, because I imagine that a campaign like this would also similarly need the arts as a essential part of how we message and share out our protections, while also building with organizational partners across the city to do this work together. So knowing a ballpark estimate would be helpful, because I also know that CCHR is a severely underfunded agency. And so to have these dollars and be a voice in pushing for that is what I want to be able to do. Is there any other information CCHR believes should be included in the outreach campaign? I know we've talked a little bit about the other bills in the suite being a part of it, but is there anything else that you're all thinking about?
So, I mean, I think just on that point, and maybe hearkening back to Intro 86, I think the pregnancy and sexual and reproductive health protections are often looked at as a kind of continuum, and so having those together. I think one of the points also regarding sort of agency collaboration and messenger is that one thing we would certainly not want to do is put out a campaign that's in our name for something that we are not able to act upon. So I think that is another reason for agency collaboration, right? If someone calls us about something NYPD is enforcing and then we happily refer them to NYPD, that can be frustrating from a customer service kind of perspective. So that's another reason I think that just the conversations about messenger and kind of what's included in a public outreach campaign is really critical.
Sure. And your point about the interagency collaboration is absolutely noted, and we would certainly want that before anything gets rolled out. Is CCHR able to include locations where New Yorkers can receive abortions as part of this campaign?
Possibly. I mean, we definitely don't have that information now, and I think that would be, I will defer to NYPD if they have that information, and also would go back to colleagues at DOHMH to understand the regulatory frameworks. That's really outside of what we have done in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can certainly assist either CHR or whoever ends up being the agency leading this on that. And I know we have them, and I'm sure DOHMH has a list as well. So, in terms of how that looks, I think the information can be provided in some manner.
Got it, great. And then just going back to how to think about building out this campaign, could you share some lessons learned about what makes an effective campaign? I mean, I raised the artwork and the artists in residence. I mean, so many of us know about this work because we're seeing it every single day, and it really sticks to you and your core. So could you just share some lessons learned that could be effective as we think about this campaign?
Sure, and I think I referenced our domestic workers campaign and our sexual harassment campaign, which precedes that one. I think in both of those instances, there was a long lead up of collaboration with community groups in thinking about where should we be pushing these campaigns out. So domestic workers was a campaign that was on bus shelters. It's a campaign that is in community and ethnic print media and also paid social media and in Spanish, English, and Chinese. And our materials there are also in languages that are related or most prevalent amongst domestic workers in New York City. We also have done targeted sort of employer outreach in that context. The sexual harassment campaign, similarly, there were focus groups that led up to the messaging in that. So these are, I think time is important in getting the message right. And then the language justice piece, which is referenced in 474, but really thinking about what it means to be getting different pieces out in different languages from a communications perspective. Do you want to add anything?
Could you speak a little bit more about the language access piece?
Oh, we'll go.
So it's the main difference between the one, I Still Believe in the City campaign, and particularly this one, is like for the Intro 4741, we're ensuring that New Yorkers across like language diversity and cultural competency, right? So the same, like whereas there was specific focus groups on this, we'll have to have like multiple focus groups. We'll have to engage with multiple community and faith partners in order to ensure that the messaging is right. So though this one thing for the I Still Believe in the City one, whereas it was one community bringing together to do this would require many and in different languages. So we want to make sure that not only are we doing it in the languages and in our domestic workers one as well, we've gone beyond the local 30 languages. We've had it in Nepali, we've had it in like African dialects as well. So just again, like it will require us to make sure that we're engaging with all our different communities and working across agencies to make that happen.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Richardson-Jordan.
Hi, thank you for the testimony. I had a couple questions. I wanted to ask on the commission side, what kind of outreach is already happening in terms of reproductive rights and sexual health, and particularly what kind of outreach online?
Yeah, so great question. I will just start by saying, on Friday we pushed out a mini campaign we were already planning that includes this and some of the pregnancy discrimination work. That's a paid social media campaign, and we've been doing a lot on social media, especially in light of COVID, but just the ways of the world. Every time, like when the law was passed in 2018, we did a campaign on these protections. In 2019, we also did a rollout of these protections. And they are included, as I mentioned in testimony, in all our fundamental 101 training has these protections. And so it's part of, and the reason the Community Relations Bureau is here today, it's very much a part of almost all the conversations that we're having about protections in the employment context.
And just to add to that, Joanne had also mentioned the fact sheets. So when we are out tabling in communities, we make sure that those fact sheets are available as part of those conversations and outreach as well.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. I wanted to ask on the NYPD side, do we know, and I'm not sure if we do know, but do we know numbers about number of incidents that are happening at clinics? Do we know if there has been a spike? Do we have any data?
Oh, sorry, thank you. So we have, in terms of incidents, are we talking about just that there are protesters present, or are we talking about incidents of criminal activity, vandalism, or things of that nature?
Yeah,
I'm
talking about the latter.
Okay. So we have not had any incidents at facilities that provide abortion and reproductive services. We have had 2 incidents at houses of worship, one of which houses an abortion alternatives program. We had vandalism there.
Okay. All right. Has there been an escalation in the protests?
I mean, we've definitely seen bigger crowds for over the last couple of days, for sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Councilmember Menon.
Oh, thank you so much, Chair. So I wanted to know if the administration has worked with the state in pushing for an equal rights amendment in the state constitution, and if added, how do you believe it will impact New York City?
So I think today was the first we heard about the resolution. I can't speak historically about collaboration. I know from our agency perspective, we work with the State Division all the time. I don't know if there have been conversations either at the administration level or other agencies around this particular protection. I know that we are reviewing the resolution, and obviously, as I think NYPD and CCHR have stated in our testimony, we are supportive of measures that advance equality on the bases of which you mentioned, and in particular, the rights that we're talking about today, sexual and reproductive protections.
Okay. And has the administration considered taking lessons from other municipalities in ensuring access to reproductive health?
I mean, I think in terms from our point of view, we're always willing to learn from other agencies of what they're doing well. We have a piece of it, but I think we're never against learning from what other people are doing well.
Okay, and if a person has an issue in accessing reproductive health facilities, where can they go to share those concerns?
They can go into their local precinct, and so that the local precinct is aware of the issue. They can also, the local precinct can accompany them back to the facility and ensure that they have unobstructed access to get inside.
Or call 911 if, both.
And is administration doing any kind of education and outreach campaign, multilingual, on that fact so that people know that they can avail themselves of that?
So we actually have boots on the ground at a lot of these locations right now. As we talked about earlier, we have police officers visiting these locations several times a day. We have police officers stationed at many of these locations for significant parts of the day so that they are visible. It's that their presence serves many purposes, one of which is to deter violence, but also they are there to help anyone who is seeking access and whose access is being obstructed or interfered with.
But I don't think there's like like a public relations campaign to alert people of their rights under this. We do work with the reproductive health care facilities, and when their offices are there, they can obviously provide the information, but there's no like broad media
Okay.
campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I would just suggest that the administration consider that. I mean, this is such a sensitive time for people, and we want to make sure that they know their rights and they know where to go for assistance. Okay, thank you very much.
With 2 minutes to spare. I said with 2 minutes to spare. I had other questions, but NYPD actually answered a lot of those questions just around the proactive measures you're taking, which happy to hear that you all are combing through the internet and really looking at possible threats and also have boots on the ground already. I guess the question that I have is what kind of training do officers receive about these protections? So is there any special trainings they're receiving?
So we actually have legal bureau attorneys, so attorneys assigned to the NYPD who go out on scene whenever there's any sorts of protest or conflict at any of these facilities to ensure that the officers on scene understand the rights and of everyone present and their responsibilities. But we also have a written directive and operations order that specifically instructs officers how to handle a situation and to understand the rights of people to access these facilities free from threats of violence or any sort of obstruction. And so the officers are mandated to comply with that operations order.
Awesome. Okay. For CCHR, I think Councilmember Richardson Jordan asked my question about, are you currently initiating any information campaigns, but are you also providing information about the human rights law provisions related to discriminatory harassment protections? And if so, what kind of information is being provided?
Yeah, so similarly, that's part of all of our trainings as well. And for that, we have information available in a whole host of languages. That's part, again, of our 101s and our basic what we do. And as Deputy Commissioner Chowdhury mentioned, these are materials that are brought in all the spaces where we are interfacing with communities as well as duty holders here, employers and others.
Yeah, I guess maybe to be a little bit more specific, do you have specific targets of this information, like areas, locations, institutions?
Yeah, so I'll say broadly, often when, and this is part of our kind of bias response efforts, which we've talked about, I think, in other spaces and hearings, these are things that we always bring with us when we are seeing or hearing, again, through interagency collaboration, about spikes in bias incidents for particular communities. But do you want to add anything?
And we also, as part of like both the bias response, but also in our other training, so even if not just our Human Rights Law 101, but our other trainings, for example, the transgender and gender nonconforming one, there are aspects of this part of discriminatory harassment that we discuss.
So I know I'd asked you a question about what other sibling agencies you think should be a part of this process, but I'm also wondering, currently, are you working with other agencies or city entities to ensure pregnant people or healthcare providers are protected from discriminatory harassment, like currently?
Yeah, I mean, with all the agencies that I named, we have ongoing collaborations with them, and we do trainings with many agencies as well. I would say some of the agencies I mentioned, DOHMH, DCWP, MOYA, we work with all the time. And as part of the outreach we did on Friday, we were also in touch with DOHMH to make sure that when materials are getting put out, they're comprehensive, right? Because life doesn't happen in a way often that aligns with legal protections per se.
Can you give more detail on the different type of ways that you work with them? So you said trainings, and I guess it's collaboration with info sharing, making sure that you all are giving proper information, but do you work with them in any other ways? Or is it just primarily trainings?
No, I mean, we work with agencies on policy development as well. The DOHMH is a long-standing partnership where we're talking all the time about how to ensure that the human rights law is implemented, and that's true because city agencies are employers under the law, but also because some are public accommodations under the law as well. So it's not just trainings and workshops, but that's how we would reach more employees at sibling agencies or staff. It's also in policy design, and then when we're reviewing legislation like these pieces, we are in collaboration as well. And for something like domestic workers, a very recent example, right? We put together materials that also reference DCWP, because that's another area where there's kind of human rights law protections, but then there's also paid leave, and that's a DCWP issue that comes up for domestic workers all the time. So we are always thinking about where our jurisdictions align and how we can do a better job of communicating that out.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Just adding to the outreach piece, we also work collaboratively, not just in the training, but also doing targeted business outreach, for instance. So when we, with the last few years, with for example, the spike in anti-Asian bias and hate, we took those posters that we had from the I Still Believe in the City campaign and worked together with SBS, with DCWP, going to businesses in specific neighborhoods to do so. So those are other ways that we collaborate as well.
Cool. So I know you said you did a campaign on Friday. There was a social media campaign. You said something. And so would you say, I had this question about, it's uncommon for protest activity outside of clinics to increase following anti-abortion court victories. And so would you say that was the agency's response to the decision? Do you have any other sort of strategies in the pipe given the decision?
So I think it was really a solidarity statement, right? These protections exist here for you in New York, and we want you to know about them and exercise them. I think we anticipate that this will be coming up in the employment context more and more, which is where these protections, the sexual and reproductive health protections, currently exist. And so we anticipate doing more in this area in the coming months and likely years. And so we are excited to hear about ideas for how to do that, and we'll certainly be in touch with community partners about what they're hearing and how our law is responsive. I think we feel extremely lucky to be in New York, where these protections will continue to exist.
Thank you. Council members, do you have any more questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for your testimony and fielding all of our questions.
Thank you.
Yo.
You're welcome. I think we'll hear testimonies from the public, but I have to take a break. I use the bathroom.
We'll now turn to public testimony. We'll start off with Jenna Lauder and then move on to Miriam Mohammed Miller. Jenna, you may begin when the sergeant calls time.
Your time will begin.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Lauder, and I'm testifying on behalf of the New York Civil Liberties Union. The NYCLU enthusiastically supports Resolution 0242, calling on the state legislature to pass and the governor to sign legislation proposing an equality amendment to Article 1 of the New York State Constitution. As this week's devastating opinions from the Supreme Court have made plain, we cannot rely on the federal Constitution to uphold our rights. We must act on the state level to fortify New York's Constitution and ensure that it covers everyone in our communities who have historically been excluded from our founding documents, including women, LGBT New Yorkers, disabled New Yorkers, and, urgently, pregnant New Yorkers. The Equality Amendment would fill gaps in the New York Constitution to secure abortion rights in our state, broadly provide equal protection for an inclusive range of classes that have been excluded from its reach, include a meaningful disparate impact test to recognize systemic discrimination, and complement and retain our Constitution's existing robust protections for religious freedom. In this moment, passing the Equality Amendment is the most meaningful action the New York legislature can take to protect New Yorkers' abortion rights, and we heartily support City Council Resolution 0242 to that effect. Additionally, the NYCLU supports the proposed efforts to inform the public about their rights to safely access reproductive health care. Despite the climate of uncertainty and fear following the overturning of Roe v. Wade, New Yorkers should not be intimidated and deterred from seeking care. New York City must ensure that people are empowered with the knowledge that they have a right to access reproductive health care and facilities without harassment or interference, as provided by the Access to Reproductive Health Care Facilities Act. Moreover, as pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes are increasingly criminalized around the country, New York must do even more to assure people that they have a right to be free from discrimination, including discriminatory non-consensual drug testing or treatment.
Time's expired.
Because of their pregnancy status or reproductive health decisions. The city should also take this opportunity to make information more widely available about where and how people can access the full spectrum of reproductive health care. As New York positions itself as an access state for people around the country seeking reproductive care, the city must ensure that all people are aware and able to take advantage of the rights, resources, and remedies available to them. The NYCLU is grateful for the Council's commitment to working towards reproductive health justice and equity, and we are eager to continue to collaborate with you in support of these and future efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenna. Can you come back? You took your camera off.
Hi.
Hi. Do you have any recommendations for how to better protect those seeking care and services from reproductive health care facilities? I know you might have some thoughts on alternatives outside of policing. So just wondering if you had any recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you named an important issue that police are not always, the best response to challenges of people seeking reproductive health care or, any of the challenges happening in our communities. So I think, it's important to continue having conversations about what alternatives to police to enforce the Access to Facilities Act could look like. I don't know that the NYCLU at this moment has a specific recommendation, but I think it's a conversation that we very much would like to continue having with the council alongside, our partners who represent providers and have, real expertise into exactly what's happening outside these facilities.
Thank you.
And not seeing any council member questions, we'll move on to Miriam Mohammed Miller. Miriam, you may begin when the sergeant calls time.
Your time will begin.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. My name is Miriam Mohammed Miller, and I'm the Director of Government Relations at Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. I would like to thank the committee chair, Councilmember Natasha Williams, and council members Shahana Hanif and Julie Menon for introducing the package of important legislation today. Planned Parenthood of Greater New York has been a trusted healthcare provider and a provider of sexual and reproductive healthcare for more than 100 years. And we strongly support both resolutions 242 and intro 474 that will help protect healthcare access in our city and protect individuals from discrimination. On the first bill, 474, that would direct the Commission on Human Rights to launch a culturally competent public awareness campaign on the city's Access to Reproductive Health Care Facilities Act. We are supportive again because this bill will help ensure New Yorkers are aware of their rights as they are attempting to enter healthcare facilities, including Planned Parenthood of Healthcare, Planned Parenthood of Greater New York healthcare facilities. We are a premier target of anti-abortion activists who often harass and intimidate our patients, our providers, and clinic escorts with the goal of dissuading individuals from seeking reproductive health care, including abortion. Almost daily, we see protesters congregate near our health centers. They chant, they preach, they sometimes follow patients close to our entrances, but just outside the 15-foot buffer zone that the law requires. And over the last few years, we actually seen an increase in protester activities, even during the pandemic. I myself, as a staffer, when pregnant in 2019, experienced harassment by protesters who chanted and said things to me, like, "Don't kill my Black baby," as my pregnancy visibly progressed. These anti-abortion protesters make it difficult for our patients to come in to our health centers and get the health care they deserve. And we hope that this bill will empower individuals with the information and their rights. We are also supportive again of resolution 0242 that calls on the New York State Legislature to pass the Equality Amendment. As was mentioned today, the Equality Amendment would enshrine provisions in our state constitution to prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, nationality, disability, and a number of other protected classes. But it has explicit language that will protect sex discrimination, including pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, which is extremely important now that we just saw the Supreme Court and 50-year-old precedent that constitutionally protected abortion in our country, which means more than 36 million people with uteruses will now lose access to essential health care. The Equality Amendment is especially important as individuals are traveling throughout the country, namely to New York, to obtain abortion care. Today, this resolution, again, is especially important. I want to hit that point home because the legislature is actually just returned to Albany for a special session, taking up legislation, has failed to add the Equality Amendment to the agenda. So I also want to uplift the call to the legislature to pass the Equality Amendment today. We stand ready to work with the council on advancing these measures, on advancing the education campaign, on ensuring the Equality Amendment is passed. And again, looking forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you able to provide answers for specific questions that some of the sites are possibly having? Okay, so do you know what experiences outside of your testimony that you can share with us in relation to any harassment that has been experienced or witnessed outside of the reproductive healthcare facilities that you have?
One more recent example in 2020 or 2021, I'm sorry, the year is escaping me. There was actually an incident that happened in front of our Manhattan Health Center, which is one of the more well-known abortion health centers in the city, where two protesters who are well-known anti-abortion activists harassed and physically assaulted staff at our health center. The Attorney General's office actually filed a lawsuit under the FACE Act, the State's FACE Act, and essentially got the protesters to stop showing up at our health centers. We are really grateful for the Attorney General and her partnership on that. But that's just one example of how their congregation in front of our health centers sometimes manifests into violent acts. Most of the time, folks are counseling, preaching, again, very near our entrances, but not making sure not to step over the 15-foot buffer zone. So yeah, that's just one example.
Okay. What protocol, if any, was followed during and or after incidents of harassment or physical harm?
We have worked, and our security team has worked with the NYPD and the local precinct and engages with them accordingly, and they do come out and respond to incidents, discussing the law in the city, making sure folks are aware of their barriers. We, as folks mentioned, understand what the presence of law enforcement translates to for many of our patients. So we, have clinic escorts and staff sometimes to de-escalate situations. Our clinic escorts are excellently trained and are able to safely usher in many patients who are coming into our health centers. They are also aware of the laws and provisions and are able to mitigate issues as they come up. So yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any recommendations for how to better protect those seeking care and services from reproductive health care facilities?
Yeah, this is definitely something that we would love to work with your office on, and Councilmember Hanif as well, and all the sponsors today, to have a broader conversation on recommendations. I think with the public outreach campaign, would definitely love to work with the commission on ensuring the outreach to communities is expansive. At Planned Parenthood of Greater New York, we often work with populations where traditional outreach mechanisms aren't effective, namely folks who are unstably housed. We have a Project Street Beat program that targets that population. So just ensuring that the outreach is done in a way that's comprehensive, again, reaches communities that are often hard to reach. Yeah, those are some of the things that are coming up for me, but again, would love to have a more expansive conversation.
Okay, to your knowledge, and this is a little bit of a different question, but to your knowledge, how many would you say arrive from outside of New York? Like protesters, do you know that, or?
I don't have the exact number, but I believe a majority of the folks, and I can speak to our security team and follow up, but I think many of the folks who are protesting in front of our health centers are from out of state. They are often part of a large network of religious-based anti-abortion organizations that dispatch folks, as folks mentioned, to states and cities where abortion is more readily available. I personally haven't been tracking that, but again, can speak to our security team for more specific data on that piece.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions, Councilmember? Okay, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to following up with you.
Thank you.
At this time, if there's anybody here that would like to testify but has not been called on yet, please raise your hand and you will be called on. Okay, seeing no hands, I think we're all set. And close out.
All right, thank you all for joining. Thank you all for staying the entire hearing. And that's it.